It starts like any ordinary day in the park or so. It seems. A young black boy, playing alone, just enjoying his game. But when one officer, fueled by bias and unchecked power, decides this child doesn't belong, everything spirals. What happens next isn't just about one boy. It's about a system that protects those in power and silences those who suffer. But this time, they picked the wrong family. Because that boy's mother isn't just any woman, she's a federal judge. And she's about to turn the system upside down. This is a story of power, prejudice, and a mother's fight for justice. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from and what time you're tuning in. Drop a comment below. We love hearing from you. And if this story grabs you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment. The late afternoon sun draped Oakwood Park in a soft golden glow, casting long shadows that danced across the open fields and winding trails. Birds chirped overhead, their melodies blending with the laughter of children playing on the jungle gym, their tiny hands gripping metal bars as they climbed higher, pushing toward the sky. Mothers and fathers relaxed on benches, sharing stories about their week, occasionally glancing up to smile at their children's joy. Everything about this scene felt calm, felt safe. But for one boy, this park was more than just a place to pass the time. It was his sanctuary. Terrence Miller, 12 years old and wearing a red baseball cap that drooped slightly over his brow, stood alone near the baseball diamond, his eyes locked onto the worn leather ball in his hand. His cap was a little too big, the stitching frayed from years of love and wear. It had once belonged to his uncle, a man who had chased his own dreams of playing in the minor leagues but never quite made it. To Terrence, that hat was more than just fabric. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even if the world seemed stacked against you, you could still show up, play your game, and give it your all. His sneakers, scuffed from too many games on cracked pavement, kicked up small clouds of dust as he shifted his weight. He wasn't supposed to be out here alone, not really. His mother, Lorraine Whitaker, a federal judge with a schedule packed tighter than the court dockets she presided over, had always been cautious. "Stay where there are people, Terrence," she'd warn, her tone serious. "Don't talk to strangers. Be home by dusk." Every time she'd promised to take him herself, she meant it, but every time, work had called louder. A late case, an emergency hearing, another broken promise. This time, though, Terrence's persistence had worn her down. His boundless optimism chipped away at her walls, like rain wearing down stone. "Just an hour," he'd pleaded, his eyes shining, his baseball glove tucked under one arm. "I'll stay in the open field, I swear." And so, with a mother's heart torn between duty and love, Lorraine had relented. Now here he was, standing in the wide open space, the expanse of the park stretching before him like a canvas, ready to be painted with the rhythm of his game. Terrence wound up and pitched the ball toward an imaginary batter, calling the play aloud as if announcing a major league game, and Miller winds up. He throws strike one. His voice carried across the field, full of energy, full of life. With every throw, every swing of his imaginary bat, Terrence wasn't just playing. He was becoming. In his mind, he stood under the bright lights of a stadium, roaring crowds chanting his name. He wasn't a kid from a small town anymore. He was a star. But stars, no matter how bright, can't always outshine the shadows that creep in. Just beyond the edge of the park, leaning against the front of his patrol car, stood Officer Scott Brenner. He sipped his coffee lukewarm and bitter, just like his mood. Brenner had been working this beat for years, patrolling the same streets, watching the same people, convinced that chaos was always just one step away. In his mind, this park wasn't a sanctuary, it was a breeding ground for trouble. He told himself that he was the thin blue line keeping order, the protector of peace. But beneath that badge, behind the uniform, was something else. Years of unchecked prejudice, buried deep beneath layers of self-justification. As Brenner scanned the park, his gaze settled on Terrence, the boy's scuffed sneakers, his worn jeans, his joy. Something about it all rubbed Brenner the wrong way. Maybe it was the way Terrence played without a care in the world, like he belonged there, like he didn't need anyone's permission. Brenner's lip curled slightly, his hand tightening on the coffee cup. "What's he doing here?" Brenner muttered, though no one was around to answer. It wasn't the first time Brenner had seen Terrence at the park. Nothing about the boy had ever seemed suspicious, but today, something stirred inside him, a suspicion that wasn't guided by evidence, but by the color of Terrence's skin. And yet, Brenner wouldn't have admitted that, not even to himself. Instead, he masked it under the guise of vigilance. Better safe than sorry, he always said, but today, his instincts weren't about safety. They were about control. Meanwhile, Terrence chased his baseball across the grass, unaware that Brenner's eyes followed him like a hawk circling overhead. He laughed softly as he retrieved the ball, brushing a stray curl of hair from beneath his cap. This was his space, his time. Here, he wasn't Lorraine Whitaker's son, shadowed by her towering reputation. He wasn't a boy worried about school tests, or the next time he'd get to see his busy mom. He was just Terrence, doing what he loved. But the peace of that moment, so pure, so fragile, was about to be shattered. As Terrence lined up for another pitch, Brenner straightened, tossing his half-empty coffee cup into a nearby trash can. The crunch of his heavy boots on the gravel path sliced through the soft hum of the park like a knife. His hand hovered near his belt, where his baton and radio hung. He wasn't heading toward trouble, he was about to create it. And Terrence, standing on that grassy field, still lost in his game, had no idea that a storm was closing in. Stay with us, because what happens next will break your heart. The gravel path crunched louder, now under Officer Scott Brenner's boots, as he moved closer to the field. His eyes never left the boy. Terrence Miller stood with his back half-turned, balancing his baseball in one hand, winding up for another throw, his face lit with focus. Caught up in the rhythm of the game, only he could see, but to Brenner, that joy, that ease, it struck a nerve. His mind wasn't on the ball. It wasn't on the boy's game. It was on something deeper, something unspoken, something ugly. Brenner tightened his jaw as he stalked forward, crossing the grassy edge like he owned it. The late afternoon sun cast a long shadow behind him, one that stretched across the green and fell over Terrence, darkening his world before he even knew what was coming. "Hey!" The officer's voice rang out sharp, slicing through the calm like a siren. Terrence jumped, startled, spinning around. His eyes landed on Brenner's uniform first, the dark navy, the gleaming badge, the belt heavy with tools of authority. Then his gaze rose to Brenner's face, stern and cold, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. Terrence's hands instinctively clutched the baseball to his chest, holding it like a shield. He blinked, confused, the echo of the officer's bark still ringing in his ears. "What are you doing here?" Brenner demanded, stepping closer. Terrence's heart thudded against his ribs. The park felt different now. The same open space that moments ago felt like freedom now felt exposed, unsafe. His fingers gripped the seams of the baseball harder. "I'm just playing," Terrence answered, his voice soft, trying to keep steady. "Playing?" Brenner echoed, a mocking edge curling into his tone. "Out here by yourself?" Terrence nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. My mom said I could come." Brenner narrowed his eyes, taking another step forward, closing the space between them. His shadow now loomed directly over Terrence, swallowing him in it. He didn't believe a word of it. Or maybe he didn't want to. "Your mom, huh?" Brenner sneered, looking around exaggeratedly, scanning the field as though searching for this mysterious mother. "And where is she now?" Terrence hesitated. He felt the shift in the air. It was subtle, but unmistakable. This wasn't just a question. This was an accusation, wrapped in authority. His throat tightened. "She's working," Terrence mumbled, swallowing hard. Brenner's lips curled into a smirk, as though he'd just caught Terrence in a lie. "Too busy to keep an eye on you, huh? Just let you roam wherever you want." Terrence shook his head quickly. "No, sir. She knows I'm here. I'm not doing anything wrong." Brenner took one more step, close enough now that Terrence could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. He stared down at the boy, eyes hard, jaw set. "You getting smart with me, boy?" The word boy hit Terrence like a slap. Not the casual word he'd heard from friends or teachers before, but the way Brenner said it sharp, biting, meant to remind him of his place. Terrence's pulse raced faster. His hands trembled around the baseball. "No, sir," Terrence stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just playing, I swear." Brenner's eyes flicked down to the ball, then back to Terrence's face. He didn't see a child. He didn't want to. He saw trouble, or at least, that's what his mind had twisted into seeing. "Do you even live around here?" Brenner snapped. Terrence's lips parted, but the words stuck. He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Just a few blocks away, Brenner's gaze hardened. He wasn't listening anymore. His mind was made up the moment he spotted the boy. A kid with scuffed shoes, playing alone, black. "I think you're lying," Brenner growled. Terrence's eyes widened, panic rising in his chest. "I'm not lying. I live here, I swear." Brenner's voice grew louder, harsher, turning heads nearby. Parents on benches glanced over, their conversations halting mid-sentence, but none of them moved. Not yet. "Don't walk away from me, boy," Brenner barked, seeing Terrence shift his weight, stepping back instinctively. "I'm not walking away." Terrence's voice cracked, eyes glistening. I'm not doing anything wrong." But Brenner wasn't hearing that. He saw fear in Terrence's eyes. And to him, that wasn't a sign of innocence. It was guilt. "What are you hiding?" Brenner snapped. "Drugs? A weapon?" Terrence gasped. "No, sir. I'm not hiding anything." His voice trembled, nearly breaking. "Please, I'm just playing baseball." But that wasn't enough. Brenner's hand shot out, gripping the front of Terrence's hoodie, yanking him forward. The boy stumbled, the baseball slipping from his hands, rolling away into the grass. His world tilted, his feet scrambling to find ground as Brenner shoved him backward, toward the chain-link fence. The scrape of metal behind him sent a jolt through Terrence's small frame as his back hit the fence. His hands flew up, trying to shield himself. Across the park, parents began pulling their children closer, shielding young eyes, unsure what to do. Some stared, some turned away. But one young woman, Emily Carter, raised her phone, her hands trembling as she hit record. Brenner's voice roared over the field. "What's in your pockets?" "And nothing." "I swear!" Terrence cried, tears springing to his eyes. But Brenner grabbed at him anyway, his rough hands patting down the boy's sides, searching for anything to justify this. "Stop! Please!" Terrence gasped. The crowd grew larger, murmurs spreading. A father, in a baseball cap, took out his own phone, recording from the sidelines. "Let him go!" someone shouted. "He's just a kid." But Brenner didn't let go. His grip tightened, his knee pressing Terrence harder into the fence. The boy's breath grew short, panic overtaking him. "You're all the same," Brenner muttered under his breath, his tone dripping with disdain. "Causing trouble, thinking you can get away with it." Terrence's tears rolled freely now, his small hands gripping the officer's arm. "Please," he choked out. "I didn't do anything." But Brenner leaned in closer, his face inches from Terrence's. The boy's heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the sounds of the park. And still, no one stepped in. Not yet. But trust me, someone would. Terrence Miller's back hit the rough bark of a towering oak tree, the force of the shove rattling through his small frame. His hands flew up, instinctively trying to shield himself, but there was no protection from what came next. Officer Scott Brenner, his face tight with anger, pressed a forearm across Terrence's chest, pinning him against the tree. The baseball, the one Terrence had clutched so close, now lay forgotten in the grass, a symbol of innocence knocked loose. His red cap, the one that always slipped too far down his forehead, tumbled from his head and landed near his feet. The world, the laughter of children, the soft breeze rustling the spring leaves all faded into background noise. Brenner's heavy breathing filled Terrence's ears. The officer's face hovered just inches away, his jaw clenched, eyes sharp and unyielding. "I asked you a question," Brenner growled. "What are you doing here?" Terrence's small body trembled beneath the officer's weight. His voice barely escaped. "I told you. I was just playing." But Brenner wasn't looking for an answer. His grip tightened. His forearm pressed harder against Terrence's chest, knocking the air out of his lungs. In that moment, a line was crossed. The tension, the suspicion that had all been brewing beneath the surface. But now? Now, it turned physical. Aggression replacing authority. Violence replacing reason. Terrence gasped, his small hand scrambling at Brenner's arm, trying to ease the pressure on his chest, but it only made Brenner angrier. His eyes flashed, convinced the boy's resistance was some kind of threat. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenner snapped, his voice rising. His other hand reached up, gripping Terrence's collar, bunching the fabric into a tight fist. The few park-goers nearby, mothers with strollers, joggers passing through, froze mid-step, heads turned. Conversations fell silent. A woman near the swing set pulled her child closer, watching the scene unfold with wide, uncertain eyes, but no one moved. Terrence's breathing grew shallow, panic flooding his chest. "Please," he wheezed, tears blurring his vision. Brenner leaned in closer, his words low but venomous. "Don't play games with me, boy. I know your type." The word "boy" again, said like a curse. Across the park, Emily Carter's phone trembled in her hand. As she filmed, her voice cracked as she shouted, "Leave him alone. He's just a kid." But Brenner either didn't hear her or didn't care. His grip on Terrence's collar remained firm, knuckles white with tension. "You think you can just hang around here? Do whatever you want?" Brenner barked, his voice booming now, loud enough to catch the ears of everyone within 100 yards. Terrence shook his head frantically. "No, sir. I'm not doing anything. Please, I'm sorry." But apologies meant nothing to Brenner. His mind was made up before this even started. Terrence's presence here, his joy, his very existence, it challenged something inside Brenner he couldn't explain. He wasn't here to de-escalate. He was here to dominate. Without warning, Brenner shoved Terrence harder against the tree. The bark bit into his back, tearing at the thin fabric of his hoodie, scratching his skin beneath. The pressure against his chest made it harder to breathe, his lungs gasping for air. "Tell me what you've got in your pockets," Brenner snarled. Terrence's hands shot up, palms open, pleading. "Nothing. I don't have anything." But Brenner wasn't listening. His hand released Terrence's collar, only to press against his throat. Not enough to choke, not fully, but enough to threaten, enough to terrify, enough to send a message. Across the park, more phones came out. Parents stared, unsure whether to step in. Fear kept them frozen. Fear of what Brenner might do if they interfered. Fear of what might happen to them if they crossed a cop. And then came the kick. Brenner, his anger boiling over, took a step back and drove his boot into Terrence's side. The blow knocked the wind out of him, doubling him over in pain. His small body crumpled toward the ground, his knees buckling beneath him. A collective gasp rippled through the park. A mother covered her mouth. A man cursed under his breath. But Brenner stood tall, his chest heaving, eyes burning with something deeper than anger. Something darker. "Get out of here!" he barked, pointing toward the exit of the park. Now, Terrence, struggling to catch his breath, his ribs aching from the blow, scrambled to his feet. His hands fumbled for his cap, but he left the baseball behind. His legs wobbled beneath him as he stumbled away, tears streaking down his cheeks. But Brenner wasn't done. "I see you here again. You're going to jail, you hear me?" Terrence nodded through his sobs, his voice too choked to respond. Emily Carter's voice cut through the silence again. "I got it all on video. Every second of it." Brenner turned toward her, his face flushing red. "Mind your business," he snapped. But it was too late. The moment was already captured, the video already recording, already spreading. Terrence reached the edge of the park. Glancing back one last time, his eyes scanned the open field where he'd played just minutes ago, where his baseball still lay in the grass. Abandoned, the place that had felt like freedom now felt like a battlefield. His safe space shattered. And across town, his mother, Judge Lorraine Whitaker, sat in her chambers, oblivious for now, but not for long. Because in a world where justice so often comes too late, this time it was coming fast. The silence in Oakwood Park was deafening. The breeze that once carried the sound of children's laughter now felt heavy, thick with tension. Terrence Miller, still gasping for breath, staggered toward the park's exit. His red cap, now crooked on his head, barely clung on as he wiped the tears from his cheeks with trembling hands. Behind him, the baseball, his only companion that day, lay forgotten in the grass, a lonely dot of white against the green. It had started as a day of freedom, a chance to escape the stress of school, the weight of his mother's long hours at the courthouse. But now, that freedom felt stolen, ripped away by hands that wore a badge. And across the park, the crowd that had gathered stood frozen. Mothers held their children close. Fathers stood stiff, watching, questioning whether they should have done more. Emily Carter lowered her phone, the recording still fresh, her hands shaking as she tried to steady herself. Her voice broke the uneasy silence again. "I have it all on camera," she shouted toward Brenner, her voice filled with disbelief and fury. Brenner turned, his jaw clenched, his face still flushed from the confrontation. His hand hovered near his belt, close to his radio, close to his baton, as if daring anyone to challenge him. "I said, mind your business," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. But the bystanders didn't scatter. Not this time. They stood their ground, their eyes locked on Brenner. His authority, once absolute, now trembled under the weight of scrutiny. A man in a worn baseball cap, standing near the benches, raised his phone higher. Still recording, his hands were steady, his jaw set in quiet defiance. "You crossed a line," the man said, his voice calm but filled with anger. "We saw everything." Brenner's eyes narrowed, his body tensed, but he didn't make another move. Not now. Emily, still filming, turned her camera toward the small group that had gathered. The park, once a peaceful escape, had turned into a stage, and the world was about to watch. Terrence, meanwhile, stumbled toward the sidewalk just outside the park. His breathing came in ragged gasps, every step a reminder of the boot that had slammed into his ribs. He glanced back once, his wide eyes catching Brenner still standing tall, defiant, in the middle of the field. But this wasn't over. Emily Carter knew it. So did the man in the baseball cap. And soon, so would everyone else. The video was uploaded within minutes. A simple caption, "Police brutality in Oakwood Park." Watch this officer choke and kick a 12-year-old boy. The footage spread like wildfire. Neighbors shared it. Friends reposted. Strangers across town, then across the state, began to comment, to question, to rage. The video captured it all: Brenner's towering figure, his rough grip on Terrence's collar, the shove against the tree, the kick that sent the boy sprawling, and the voice, the clear, panicked voice of a child, pleading, "Please, I didn't do anything." It wasn't long before local news stations caught wind. Headlines flashed. "Officer caught on camera assaulting black child in local park." The image of Terrence Small, defenseless against the backdrop of the towering oak tree, spread faster than anyone could have imagined. At first, The precinct stayed silent, but as the views climbed into the thousands, then tens of thousands, they couldn't ignore it. A statement was released. "We are aware of a video circulating involving one of our officers. The incident is under review." But for Terrence, there was no waiting, no time to process. By the time he reached home, his body ached, but his heart hurt even more. Lorraine Whitaker, deep in case files at her desk, barely heard the door creak open. She glanced up, expecting to see her son bounding in, cheeks flushed from running, his baseball cap askew, that boyish grin lighting up the room. But instead, she saw him standing in the doorway, quiet, small, broken. Her heart dropped. "Terrence?" she called softly. He didn't answer at first, just stood there, frozen, the fear still etched across his face. Lorraine rose, her instincts kicking in. She crossed the room in seconds, kneeling before him, taking his hands in hers. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a mix of calm and panic. Terrence shook his head, tears welling again. He tried to speak, but choked on the words. Lorraine's eyes scanned him, his disheveled clothes, the faint bruise forming on his ribs, the scrape on his elbow. She felt her breath catch. "Terrence, talk to me." He finally met her eyes, the words spilling out, broken and raw. "Mama, the cop, he grabbed me, said I didn't belong, kicked me." Lorraine's world shifted. Her knees buckled beneath her, but she caught herself, pulling Terrence into her arms. "Oh, baby," she whispered, holding him tight. Her mind raced. A cop? In Oakwood Park? But before she could ask more, her phone buzzed. Again and again, dozens of messages, dozens of missed calls. Her fingers fumbled as she unlocked the screen. At the top, Emily Carter's message, "Judge Whitaker, you need to see this. I'm so sorry." The video played, and Lorraine's world stopped. There, on the screen, was her son, his wide, terrified eyes, his small frame pinned against the tree, the officer's hand on his throat, his boot slamming into Terrence's side. Lorraine's hands trembled. Her heart raced. The legal briefs on her desk blurred beneath her tears. Her son, her baby. Her grip tightened around him as the video ended. "I'm going to fix this," she whispered, fierce now, her voice hardening. "I swear to you, Terrence, this isn't the end." Because Lorraine Whitaker wasn't just any mother. She was a federal judge, a woman who had spent her life fighting for justice. And now, that fight had come to her doorstep. Stay with us, because what happens next? It's about to get personal. Lorraine Whitaker didn't sleep that night. The walls of her home, usually a place of calm after long days in court, now felt suffocating. She paced back and forth across the living room, the soft creak of the hardwood floors beneath her feet, the only sound in the silence. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, Terrence's wide, terrified eyes, his small frame pinned to that tree, the officer's hand on his throat, his boot slamming into her son's ribs, her hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something primal. A need to protect, a need to fight. The legal world had always been Lorraine's battleground. She'd made a career out of dismantling systemic racism, case by case, brick by brick. But tonight, the walls of that system felt like they were closing in on her. She had fought for other people's children for years. Now it was her own son who needed her. She sat at her dining table, papers spread out before her, notes, contacts, the beginnings of a plan. She wasn't just going to press charges. She was going to make sure this case shook the very ground the precinct stood on. Her phone buzzed again. Calvin Douglas, civil rights attorney, friend, partner in this fight. "You good?" he asked, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. Lorraine exhaled sharply. "Good? No. Focused?" "Yes." Calvin chuckled lightly, but there was no humor in it. "I figured We're not just filing a complaint, Lorraine said firmly, her eyes scanning the social media posts still blowing up. I want civil rights violations. Assault. Child endangerment. Calvin's tone shifted to match hers. We'll go for all of it, but be ready. The police union's already moving, I know, Lorraine muttered, the familiar weight of political resistance pressing against her chest. They'll spin it. Paint Brenner as the victim. Calvin didn't deny it. They'll try, but the video's damning. Public opinion's on our side. Lorraine leaned back, rubbing her temples. Public opinion is fickle. You know that. One whisper about Terrence's background, one rumor, and it'll all start to crumble. He's 12, Calvin snapped. They can't smear a 12-year-old. They've done worse. Silence fell between them for a beat. I've spent my whole career watching this system protect its own, Lorraine continued, her voice softer now, tired. I'm not naive. They'll come for me, too. Call me biased. Say I'm using my position as a judge to sway things. Calvin's voice softened. Then let them. You know how to handle this. Lorraine closed her eyes. She did, but knowing it and living it were two different things. I won't let this go, she said finally. No matter what, I know. They ended the call, and Lorraine sat in the quiet again. She glanced at the clock. 4:12 a.m. The house was still dark, except for the faint glow of Terrence's nightlight down the hall. She stood, her bare feet silent on the floor, and walked toward his room. Pushing open the door gently, she saw him curled beneath the covers, his small hands clutching the edges of his blanket, his face turned toward the wall. His red baseball cap rested on the nightstand beside him, a silent reminder of the day that had started with so much hope and ended in violence. Lorraine's heart ached. She stepped inside, sitting softly on the edge of his bed, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. I'm going to fix this, she whispered, but the question lingered in the air. Could she? Across town, Scott Brenner sat in his small apartment, nursing a beer at his kitchen table. The glow of his television lit the room. Flashing headlines he couldn't escape. Officer under fire for assaulting child. Community demands justice. His phone buzzed on the table. Richard Sterling, his union lawyer. Turn off the news, Sterling barked the moment Brenner answered. It's not helping, Brenner grunted, taking another swig of beer. You see this? They're making me out to be a monster, Sterling sighed. This is bad, Scott. The video's everywhere. Brenner slammed his fist against the table, the empty bottle rattling. I was doing my job. Sterling's voice stayed calm, calculated. We're going to spin that? You felt threatened. The crowd was hostile. You acted in the interest of public safety. Brenner leaned forward, resting his head in his hands. It wasn't like that. It doesn't matter what it was, Sterling cut in. It matters what we can make people believe. Brenner sat silently, the weight of his own actions finally settling in. But across the city, Lorraine had already begun moving forward. She gathered statements from witnesses, including Emily Carter and the man in the baseball cap who had captured the entire incident on video. Both agreed to speak out. Despite the fear, I couldn't just stand there, Emily said when Lorraine called what that officer did. I've never seen anything like it. You saw exactly what I saw, Lorraine replied. And I need your help to make sure it doesn't get buried. Emily's voice wavered but stayed firm. I'll do whatever it takes. Lorraine's resolve hardened with every conversation. She contacted the district attorney's office, pushing for an official investigation. Marcus Hayes, the DA, called her back late that evening. I've seen the video, Lorraine, he said, his voice tired. You've got a hell of a case. Then let's move on it, Marcus hesitated. You know the union's already circling the wagons. I don't care, Lorraine snapped. This is my son. I know, Marcus sighed. We'll push for charges. But brace yourself, the backlash will be ugly. Lorraine closed her eyes. She could already feel it. But this time, she wasn't backing down. Stay with us. Because the fight for justice is just getting started. It didn't take long for the town to split in two. The video of Officer Scott Brenner pinning and kicking Terrence Miller had spread far beyond Oakwood Park, beyond the quiet neighborhoods and winding streets of this small Virginia town. What started as a local outrage became a national conversation overnight. Outside the police station, voices rose louder each day. Protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, their signs raised high, their chants echoing through the air. Justice for Terrence. No more police brutality. Protect our children. Some carried pictures of Terrence, his school photo, his gap-toothed smile lighting up his young face, a stark contrast to the terrified boy in the video. The protest lines grew, stretching across city blocks, drawing in parents, teachers, students, community leaders, and strangers who didn't know the Miller family but felt the sting of injustice just the same. For many, this wasn't just about Terrence. This was about every black child who had been stopped, questioned, harassed, or worse, for simply existing in spaces they were told they didn't belong. Lorraine Whitaker watched from the sidelines at first. The courthouse steps where she had walked so many times before, the halls where she had presided over cases, now felt like a battleground. She saw the determination in the faces of the protesters, their chants steady, their resolve unshaken, but it wasn't all support. Across the street, a different crowd gathered. Blue flags waved. Signs reading "Support our police and stop the witch hunt" stood tall, defiant. They shouted back, their voices sharp, their words cutting through the chants of the protesters like knives through cloth. They argued that Officer Brenner had done nothing wrong, that he'd made a tough call, that people like Terrence didn't respect authority, that they brought trouble on themselves. It was the same old story, the same deflections, the same refusal to see. The tension between the two groups felt like a stretched rubber band, ready to snap. Police lined the sidewalks, keeping a careful distance, their eyes scanning both sides of the street. The irony wasn't lost on Lorraine. The same officers who had let Brenner walk free were now the ones tasked with keeping the peace. Inside the station, Scott Brenner watched it all unfold from a narrow window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw clenched as he listened to the chants outside. "Look at this circus," he muttered under his breath, all over a kid who shouldn't have been there in the first place. Another officer, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Not everyone on the force agreed with Brenner. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others nodded silently, unwilling to speak up but just as unwilling to challenge the man at the center of the storm. For Brenner, the walls were closing in. He'd been placed on administrative leave, stripped of his badge and gun for now, but the union was working overtime behind the scenes, crafting statements, painting him as the victim of public hysteria. They reminded the world of the dangers police face daily. They spoke of split-second decisions, of threats unseen by the cameras that caught only moments, not the whole truth, they claimed. But Lorraine knew better. She'd seen this playbook before. She could almost predict the next moves, the headlines that would question her integrity, her motives, the commentators who would ask if she was too close to the case, if her role as a judge tainted her ability to see it objectively. They didn't know her, and they certainly didn't know Terrence. At home, Terrence felt the weight of it all in ways no child should. The bruises on his ribs were fading, but the ones inside those stayed. He no longer asked to go outside. The baseball glove sat untouched on the dining table, the red cap folded neatly on top. One afternoon, Lorraine found him sitting on the edge of his bed, his knees tucked to his chest, his eyes distant. "Baby," she said gently, sitting beside him. "Talk to me." Terrence shook his head at first, but then the words spilled out. "I don't feel safe anymore, Mama," he whispered. "What if he comes back? What if they all come?" Lorraine's heart broke all over again. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. "He won't come back," she promised. "I'm going to make sure of that." But Terrence's eyes stayed filled with doubt. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lorraine pulled back, just enough to look him in the eyes. "By doing what I do best," she said softly. "By fighting for what's right." And fight she did. The days turned into weeks. The media frenzy didn't die down. If anything, it grew stronger. Every night, Lorraine turned on the news and saw her son's face splashed across the screen, his story dissected, debated. Some anchors showed compassion, calling for reform. Others questioned everything: Terrence's behavior, Lorraine's role, even the validity of the video. But Lorraine stood firm. She met with Marcus Hayes, the district attorney, every day. They pored over case files, gathered witness statements, dug into Officer Brenner's past. What they found wasn't surprising, but it was damning. A pattern of complaints, incidents swept under the rug, small infractions here and there, but all with the same thread, disproportionately targeting Black and Hispanic individuals, and none of it had stuck. Until now. The evidence was building, and so was the pressure. The police union fought back, launching a media blitz to defend Brenner's name. They painted him as a hard-working officer, unfairly villainized by an emotional public. They spun the narrative, claimed he had been forced into a difficult situation, argued that the park had a history of troublemakers, but Lorraine wouldn't let them bury the truth. Every interview she gave, every rally she attended, she kept her message clear. This wasn't about one bad officer. This was about a system that let him stay on the streets, a system that turned a blind eye to the warning signs. Terrence's story became more than a headline. It became a symbol for every child who had been silenced, for every family who had been told to move on. Lorraine knew the fight ahead would be long. The system didn't change easily, but this time she wasn't fighting alone. Stay with us, because the pressure is building, and soon the courtroom will decide what justice really means. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but Lorraine Whitaker was determined to push them forward. The case against Officer Scott Brenner was no longer just whispers among the community or shouts on protest lines. It was official. The district attorney's office had begun assembling their case, drafting the charges: assault, child endangerment, violation of civil rights. And though Lorraine knew better than anyone how long and hard these battles could be, she also knew this was the moment to strike. Terrence, still carrying the emotional weight of the attack, sat quietly in the living room one afternoon, watching cartoons. Though his attention drifted in and out, Lorraine sat nearby, laptop open, legal documents scattered across the table. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift from the words on the screen to her son, his face, soft, distracted, but never quite at peace. They hadn't talked much about the legal battle since those first few nights. Lorraine wanted to protect him from the full force of what was coming, but she knew that wasn't possible. Not when the world outside kept reminding him. The phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Lorraine glanced at the screen. Marcus Hayes. "We've got something," he said without preamble when she answered. Lorraine sat up straighter. "What?" "Brenner's personnel file. We finally got the internal reports. There's a pattern here, Lorraine. Complaints going back years." Her breath caught. "How many?" "5. All use of force complaints. 3 involving Black or Hispanic minors." Lorraine squeezed her eyes shut. "And none of them stuck." "Nothing. They got buried. Insufficient evidence. No follow-up." She ran a hand over her face, feeling the weight of every one of those cases. "Let's use them," she said firmly. "We show this isn't just about Terrence. It's about every child this man put his hands on." "I'm already on it," Marcus replied. "But the union's not going to roll over. They're already working to discredit the witnesses. They'll claim it's a witch hunt." Lorraine's jaw tightened. Then we hit back harder. When she hung up, she looked at Terrence, who had turned his head toward her, sensing the shift in the room. "Are we winning?" he asked softly. Lorraine walked over, sitting beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. "We're fighting, baby," she said, "and we're getting stronger." But even as the legal strategy grew sharper, the emotional toll weighed heavier. Lorraine knew what was coming: the media attacks, the union's pushback, the strain on Terrence. And there was one conversation she couldn't avoid any longer. That evening, she sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where he once did his homework, where they'd shared meals and stories. But tonight, the space between them felt heavier. "Baby," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I need to tell you something." Terrence looked up from his plate, his eyes guarded. "This case, when we go to court, there are going to be people who say things about you, things that aren't true." Terrence's brow furrowed. "Why?" Lorraine sighed, reaching for his hand. "Because that's how they protect themselves. They'll try to make it seem like you did something wrong, like you deserved what happened." Terrence's lips pressed together, his grip tightening around her fingers. "But you didn't," Lorraine continued, her voice growing firmer. "And I need you to remember that no matter what they say." Terrence nodded, swallowing hard. "They're scared," Lorraine said softly. "Scared of what happens when we stand up and say enough is enough." There was a long pause between them. Then, Terrence straightened his back, his chin lifting slightly. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, more to himself than to her. Lorraine smiled faintly, pride swelling in her chest. "No, baby, you didn't." The case moved forward. Witnesses were interviewed. Statements were collected. Emily Carter, the woman who filmed the incident, became a key part of the case. Her video, along with the footage from other bystanders, painted a picture too clear to ignore. But Lorraine knew that the fight wasn't just in the evidence, it was in the court of public opinion. The union continued its campaign, releasing statements defending Brenner, portraying him as a dedicated officer caught in a difficult situation. They spoke of danger, of split-second decisions, of a community too quick to judge. Local news stations ran interviews with Brenner's colleagues officers, who spoke of his years of service, of his commitment to the force. They painted a picture of a man under siege, a victim of circumstance, but Lorraine countered every step of the way. She appeared at rallies, gave interviews, stood firm in front of the cameras. "This isn't about destroying a man's career," she said calmly to a reporter one evening. "This is about holding someone accountable for his actions, for what he did to my son." Across town, the police union headquarters buzzed with activity. Lawyers drafted press releases. Strategies were refined. And in the middle of it all sat Scott Brenner, his face pale, his hands fidgeting in his lap. His union lawyer, Richard Sterling, leaned across the table. "You're sticking to the story, right?" Brenner nodded stiffly. "I felt threatened." The kid was acting suspicious. The crowd was hostile. Sterling gave a satisfied nod. "Good. That's all we need. The rest is spin." But Brenner wasn't so sure anymore. The video haunted him. The look in that boy's eyes, the fear, the confusion. For a brief moment, guilt flickered. But he shoved it down. He had a story to stick to. Back in her office, Lorraine continued working late into the night, reviewing files, preparing statements, coordinating with Marcus Hayes. The case was building, and so was the momentum. Terrence began to sense it too. The fear that once clung to him started to loosen its grip, slowly, cautiously. He picked up his baseball glove again. One afternoon, he asked Lorraine if they could toss the ball in the backyard. She smiled, holding back tears, and nodded. They played until the sun dipped low in the sky, their laughter blending with the rustling of the trees. And for a moment, there was hope. Hope that justice wasn't just a word. Hope that this fight mattered. Stay with us. Because as the courtroom draws near, the stakes are higher than ever. The courthouse was alive with tension. On the day the trial began, the streets outside were lined with protesters, holding signs that shouted for justice, their voices raised in chants. that echoed off the marble walls of the building. On one side, supporters of Terrence Miller, demanding accountability, holding posters with his smiling face. On the other, defenders of Officer Scott Brenner, waving blue flags, declaring their faith in law enforcement, convinced that he had only done what was necessary. Inside the courtroom, however, it was quiet. A heavy, expectant kind of quiet. The kind that settles before a storm. Every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters scribbling in notepads. Families from both sides sitting rigid, strangers drawn in by the headlines, and the promise of seeing justice unfold. And in the middle of it all sat Lorraine Whitaker, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed ahead. Beside her, Terrence sat small but steady, his fingers intertwined with his mother's, trembling despite the brave face he wore. Lorraine leaned down and whispered in his ear, "You don't have to be afraid, baby. We've got the truth on our side," Terrence nodded. But the fear never left his eyes. At the defense table, Officer Brenner sat stiffly in his chair, his face an unreadable mask. His lawyer, Richard Sterling, leaned close, whispering something to him. Brenner barely reacted, his jaw locked, his hands clenched on the table as if gripping for stability. This was it. No more interviews, no more statements. This was where the battle would play out. In front of the jury, in front of the world, the judge entered, the room rising in unison, a collective breath held, then released as everyone took their seats again. Evelyn Brooks, the prosecutor, stood first. She was young but seasoned, her reputation built on tough cases, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that filled the room. She walked slowly to the jury, letting the silence settle before she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but impassioned, "this case is not just about one bad officer. It's about a system that allows abuse of power to continue unchecked. It's about a 12-year-old boy who was treated not as a child, but as a threat." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the jurors. Then she turned to face the gallery. "This is about holding those responsible accountable," she said firmly. "Today, we are here to seek justice, not only for Terrence Miller, but for every child who's been made to feel powerless." Then, with a click of the remote, she played the video. The courtroom fell silent as the footage filled the screen. Officer Brenner grabbing Terrence's collar, shoving him into the tree, his boot slamming into the boy's side. Terrence's cries for help echoed in the courtroom, just as they had in the park. Gasps rippled through the audience, even among those who had seen the video before. But this time, it wasn't a clip shared online. This time, it was evidence. Lorraine felt her throat tighten as she reached for Terrence's hand again, squeezing gently. Evelyn Brooks clicked the screen off. "That," she said softly, "is what this case is about." Then it was Sterling's turn. The defense attorney rose, his expression calm, practiced. He straightened his tie, then faced the jury. "This is not about racism," he said, his voice smooth. "This is not about a system. This is about a man, a police officer, who made a split-second decision in a difficult situation." He walked slowly across the courtroom, pausing for effect. Officer Brenner believed he was protecting the public. Was he perfect? No, but perfection is not the standard for guilt. He acted based on what he believed to be the best interest of public safety. Lorraine clenched her jaw, feeling her pulse quicken. She knew this playbook. She'd seen it too many times. Paint the officer as a man under pressure, cast doubt, shift the focus away from the facts. The first witness was Miles Clark, the man in the baseball cap, the one who had recorded the video. He took the stand with a quiet resolve. "I saw what happened," Miles said firmly. When asked to describe the scene, the park was calm. Kids were playing. There was no threat, no reason for what that officer did. The defense tried to rattle him on cross-examination, questioning his motives, suggesting he wanted attention. "I didn't record it for attention," Miles shot back. "I recorded it because I knew that boy needed someone to stand up for him." Lorraine nodded slightly, grateful for his strength. One by one, other witnesses followed. A mother who had been at the park testified about how her own children asked why the officer was hurting that boy. "I didn't know how to explain it to them," she said, tears in her eyes. "How do you explain that?" But the most emotional moment came when Terrence himself took the stand. Lorraine's heart pounded as she watched her son climb into the oversized witness chair. He looked impossibly small, his feet barely brushing the floor, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. The prosecutor approached him gently. "Terrence," she said softly, "can you tell us what happened that day?" Terrence swallowed hard, his hands gripping the armrests, but he nodded. "I was just playing baseball," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. Then the officer came and started yelling at me. I didn't understand why." He paused, his eyes filling with tears, but he continued. "He grabbed me, pushed me against a tree. I couldn't breathe." The courtroom was silent, every word cutting through the air like a blade. When the defense cross-examined, Sterling tried to confuse him, asking rapid-fire questions. Terrence held firm. "I didn't do anything to make him mad," he said. "He just didn't like me." As Terrence stepped down, Lorraine stood, her arms outstretched, holding him close as he buried his face against her shoulder. But the prosecution wasn't done. The next piece of evidence hit harder than any video. An internal memo surfaced an official warning from Brenner's superiors. The document revealed that they had recommended his removal from patrol duty, citing excessive force complaints. The department had ignored it. The courtroom erupted. The jury shifted uncomfortably, their faces grim. Evelyn Brooks stood again. "This isn't just about one bad cop," she told the jury. "This is about a system that protects bad cops." Lorraine felt hope stir inside her for the first time in weeks. The foundation had been laid. The battle was far from over. Stay with us, because the truth is rising to the surface, and the fight for justice is entering its most critical phase. The trial had stretched on for days. Every testimony, every piece of evidence, every moment of cross-examination had peeled back another layer of the truth. But now, the end was near. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than ever, as the final arguments were laid bare before the jury. Lorraine Whitaker sat quietly beside Terrence, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. She could feel the tension in his small frame, the way his body leaned into hers as if seeking safety in the storm. And even though she had spent her career in rooms like this, wearing the robe of authority, today she sat as a mother, waiting for justice. Evelyn Brooks, the prosecutor, stood once again before the jury. Her voice, steady and filled with quiet power, carried through the hushed room. "What you've witnessed here," she began, "is a story we've heard too many times. A black child, treated not as a child, but as a threat. A man entrusted with power, abusing it. This is not about one moment, one bad decision. This is about choices. Choices Officer Brenner made to use force where none was needed, to escalate where there was no danger." She paused, letting her words settle in the minds of the jurors. "You have the power to hold him accountable, to tell Terrence Miller and every child like him that their lives matter, that their pain matters, that we as a community will not stand by when those entrusted with power betray it." Her closing words hung in the air, and then she sat, her eyes never leaving the jury. Richard Sterling rose slowly, adjusting his tie with a measured calm. His tone was practiced, his expression controlled. "Members of the jury," he began, "Officer Brenner was doing his job, a job that demands split-second decisions in uncertain situations. Yes, he made a mistake, but a mistake is not a crime. He believed he was protecting the public. You've seen the world we live in, the dangers officers face every day. That's what this case is about. It's not about racism. It's not about a system. It's about a man who was trying to keep his community safe. Lorraine felt her stomach churn. The words were familiar, the excuses rehearsed. She glanced at the jury, searching their faces, hoping they could see through the smoke and mirrors. When Sterling sat down, the judge gave the jury their final instructions. Then the courtroom emptied, leaving Lorraine and Terrence in that quiet space between hope and dread. The deliberation took hours. To Lorraine, it felt like days. She and Terrence waited in a small room down the hall, the tension so thick it seemed to weigh down the air. Terrence sat cross-legged on the couch, flipping through a small notebook Lorraine had given him to help pass the time. The pages were filled with doodles, soccer balls, stick figures, but also words. I didn't do anything wrong. Mama says I'm brave. Lorraine paced the floor, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her mind spinning with possibilities. What if the jury didn't believe? What if the system failed them again? Mama, Terrence's voice broke the silence. What if they don't believe me? Lorraine stopped mid-step, kneeling before him, cupping his face gently in her hands. They will, she said, her voice steady, because the truth is on our side, and no matter what happens in that courtroom, you've already shown how brave you are. I'm proud of you, baby, Terrence nodded, but the fear lingered in his eyes. When the call finally came, Lorraine felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The jury had reached a verdict. Back in the courtroom, the gallery filled once again, reporters, protesters, supporters, all holding their breath. Lorraine and Terrence sat side by side, her hand never leaving his. The foreperson stood, a middle-aged woman with a resolute expression. Unfolding a slip of paper, her voice echoed through the room. On the charge of assault in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps rippled through the gallery. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. A few scattered claps, quickly silenced by the judge. And on the charge of violation of civil rights, guilty. Lorraine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to Terrence, who looked up at her, wide-eyed, disbelief washing over his face. We did it, baby, she whispered, pulling him close. We did it. Terrence's voice was small, uncertain. Does this mean it's over? Lorraine kissed his forehead. Not over, but it's a step in the right direction. Across the room, Officer Brenner sat motionless, his face pale, his hands gripping the table. Sterling leaned in to whisper, but Brenner barely moved, the weight of the verdict pressing down on him. The judge dismissed the court, setting the sentencing hearing for a later date. As people began to file out, Lorraine and Terrence were surrounded by supporters, friends, activists, even strangers who had followed their fight. Miles Clark, the man who had recorded the video, approached with tears in his eyes. You did it, he said, shaking Lorraine's hand. You stood up for what's right. Lorraine's voice cracked with emotion. We couldn't have done it without you. That night, as the city buzzed with the news of the verdict, Lorraine tucked Terrence into bed, brushing a curl from his forehead. The bruises were fading, but she knew the emotional scars would take longer to heal. You're my hero, she whispered, and I promise I'll keep fighting. For you, for all of us, stay with us, because even though this chapter has closed, the fight for justice is far from over. In life, we often hear that justice moves slowly, but stories like this remind us that justice only moves when we push it forward. This isn't just about one child or one family. It's about standing up when something's wrong, even when the system feels too big, too powerful to change. Lorraine Whitaker's fight wasn't just for her son. It was for every parent, every grandparent who's ever worried about the world their children and grandchildren are growing up in. And it shows us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward in spite of it. Whether you've raised a family, built a community, or simply lived long enough to know right from wrong, this is a call to action. Never stop standing up for what matters, because real change doesn't come from silence, It comes from voices like yours. It comes from demanding better, not just for today, but for the generations that follow. Justice, respect, dignity, they're not gifts. They're things we fight for. And together, no matter our age, we can keep pushing that fight forward. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this. Together, let's keep the conversation going.